Hello and welcome to today's event on agency M&A. This is a fireside chat about helping you create your ideal exit at your agency. Karl Sakas here, excited to be joined by Jonathan Baker from Punctuation. We'll be talking about succession planning at agencies, including yours. Thanks you for joining live, or if you are watching the recording. We've gotten a lot of questions in advance. We're looking forward to going through those. And if you're joining live, feel free to share questions in chat as well. Some housekeeping. We're recording. If you're watching live, you'll get the replay. Post questions in chat. And if you'd like to connect with me or with Jonathan, we've shared LinkedIn links in chat. Would love to connect. In my experience, I've been helping agencies exit for over a decade. Most founders want an exit, but they don't always realize what it actually takes to get an exit or to get an exit that they want, that matches their needs. So today, Jonathan and I will be sharing some of the advice that we typically share only with our clients, but you are getting access to that. In my work as an agency exit advisor, I am helping people who want to exit in the future. So if someone is looking to exit right now, I will point them to Jonathan or to others who are focused on doing the deal. I tend to help people when they're looking to exit a few years out, 10 years out, or potentially more. Jonathan, if you wanted to introduce yourself if people aren't familiar with you yet.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. I'm one half of the firm Punctuation. The other half is my father, David C. Baker. We are an advisory firm that only works with small to mid-sized marketing services firms, and about two-thirds of our work is on the M&A side. We do valuations, sell-side searches, buy-side searches, internal transfers, basically anything related to equity changing hands. That's us.
Awesome. Uh, we've grouped the conversation today. Again, we got a lot of questions, and Jonathan and I identified other questions for each other. We've grouped things into roughly three parts: getting grounded, how to get ready, and some hard truths. We do hope to have some time for live Q&A as well, but kind of depends on how things go. If we don't get to a burning question you have, feel free to reach out and we can point you in the right direction on that. All right. Jonathan, I have a question for you to start. What do you wish more founders understood about the M&A process before they contact someone like you?
There's a few things. I think the first is around that word process, and it really is a process. It's not kind of a one-time chance. A lot of folks think that they have to have every single duck in a row, and you get one shot to go to market and sell, and that's it. The reality is, you can go to market multiple times if you want. I mean, you go to market. If you don't have a deal that you like, you learn, you adjust, you grow, and then you go to market again. Um, Another thing that I wish more founders understood is that it really is a lot more nuanced than sell or don't sell,
Hmm.
right? Those might be the extremes, shutting down the business or sell to private equity, but there's kind of a lot of gray area in the middle. You could have a strong number two who's running the business for you, throwing off profit. Carl, I know you work in that sphere.
I have a number of clients doing that. You need to find the right person. You need to give them the right support. You need to pay them enough and incentive alignment and all that. It can work in the right situation, not for everyone.
Yeah. And even within selling, you could, there's acqui-hire, there's a full-on sale, there's selling just the accounts. So even if you don't have a traditionally sellable firm, there still might be options for you.
Hmm.
Um, I think we don't see folks planning for succession enough. The fact that you're on this webinar means that you're not in that bucket. But thinking ahead, thinking strategically about, how does this thing wrap up and how do I live the life I want to live based on, what I've built. That's a really important thing to start thinking about early while you still have time to course correct. And then we also just have folks who come to us with misinformation that, I wish they hadn't gotten.
Mm. What is some misinformation you've heard recently from people who had been misinformed?
That I'll be valued based on a multiple of revenue, that I'll be expected to stick around for 5 years after a sale, that I'll get an all cash offer that doesn't require anything of me afterwards. Um, and there's many other options.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's sort of a consider the source. Like if someone has heard this amazing, like all cash and you don't have to stay and all, like who is saying that and what are their incentives to say that that is the case?
Yeah.
Ugh. Um,
Have them put up the cash. That's what I say.
yeah, yeah,
Hey, I have a question for you, Carl.
yes.
How long should agency owners expect leadership succession planning to take, especially if selling eventually is the ultimate goal?
As a consultant, I am legally obligated to say it depends. But okay, let's get more specific. Uh, if you have a very strong number two who's able to work on a standalone basis, we can talk more about this, you could potentially have them take over for you within a year. That's allowing time for them to move if they're already effectively, say, the president, and you make them the CEO. If you don't have someone in that position, either if you're going to have to hire externally or you need to develop someone internally, it's going to take longer, probably at least a few years. I have a client where the owner wanted the option to sell. We identified a key employee who had high potential and we built out a succession plan. And the idea was that the employee initially was an account manager, moved up to director of client services, moved up to VP. And part of my structuring the succession plan was don't just suddenly go from account manager to CEO. They need to prove themselves at the layers. They were at AM, director, VP, president, and earlier this year they became the CEO of the agency. That took 5 years. They probably could have done it faster. The employee was a strong match. But in this case, the owner actually decided now that he's working like a few hours a month, he is happy to collect the profits other than some profit sharing, and enjoy that. So, maybe 5 years at the longer end, 1 year on the shorter end. Keep in mind that if you have to hire externally, you could be adding 18 months to the process because you could hire someone, they claim they're competent, they claim they have good character, but you want to see that that's true before you give them the reins.
I often claim both of those things about myself.
But I mean, it seems to have worked, and yeah, yeah. Oh, so thinking about a quick question for you, Jonathan. What do you, or thinking the pieces, what kinds of buyers are out there today? You were alluding to some of this. What kind of buyers are out there today, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation because the deals can look so different depending on
Mhm.
the type of buyer. So let me just kind of list the types of buyers first, and then I'll go back and
Yeah.
talk about what they're looking for. You've got strategics, you have private equity, you have family offices, you have roll ups and holdcos, and then you have individuals. Um, let's start with strategics. So even the word strategic gets thrown around a lot, but it, meaning just another agency buying you for a strategic reason. But that's a really wide definition already, right? So within strategics, it really varies. They could be buying you for your capabilities if they're trying to build out a particular capability. They could be buying you for your profit, if they're trying to kind of multiple arbitrage and raise their own profit in order to get a higher multiple and a better exit. They could be buying you because of a particular client or group of clients that they want access to and want to cross sell. And they could be buying you for your talent. You have a team that is doing something that they are not. Geography could also play a part if they're trying to make headwinds in a particular geography. Usually with strategics, it's going to be some combination of those things weighted differently for
Hmm.
each buyer. For private equity, it's a little bit more straightforward. You do have smaller private equity, which tends to be a little bit less evil, I will say, um, than larger private equity. But all private equity is looking for growth. They want something that they can throw fuel on and grow. They want the leadership, usually meaning you as a founder, on board for 3 to 5 years, depending on kind of their investment thesis. And they want you to be large enough for it to be worth their time. So private equity usually isn't going to be interested unless you're at least at 1 million in EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, but oftentimes even larger than that.
Because rough generalizing, it takes the same amount of due diligence for a $3 million EBITDA versus 1 million, but
Right.
that's going to help their future valuation a lot more.
Yes. Family offices also can vary really wildly. I think of family offices as kind of private equity light in terms of that's where the that's their general approach. But in my experience, family offices tend to value culture a little bit more, and they also are not as growth driven. So they might have more of a grow slowly, organically, and hold approach.
Hmm.
But they're not going to have the same resources that private equity might. A roll up and holding company, they're also looking for growth potential. They're also looking for leadership on board. Selling to one of these is kind of a trust and pray approach to offloading your agency. You have to really believe in what they're building because you are not going to be getting much, if any, cash up front. It's really all going to be dependent. And then selling to an individual, um, they oftentimes are looking for growth, but it doesn't necessarily have to be insane growth. They just want something they can optimize based on their own skill sets. They often want leadership to step away. They don't want to carry the burden of that salary, and their goal is to actually run it as an individual. And then instead of being large enough, you actually have to be small enough for an individual. A lot of those deals are done under SBA funding, which has a cap of 5 million. So um, that would be kind of the broad strokes.
That makes sense. I was at the ETA conference, the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, second time, and that's filled with people who are looking to buy businesses. They have funding lined up so they can come in and buy, and they want, in the example, they want you to leave as soon as possible. Because usually they're recent MBA graduates, they want to become the CEO of the business, and they want you to leave so they can become the CEO.
Yep.
Uh, so that's good on getting out faster. One challenge is you may have to persuade them on the agency business model because, one of the people I talked to, they buy street sweeping companies. So they'll have like 5-year contracts for street sweeping and they'll buy up, local businesses and they'll roll them up. If they're considering street sweeping, 5-year contracts versus agencies with, 12-month at the most, different appeal. Let's shift shortly into getting ready to exit. But thinking about misconceptions, I know, Jonathan, you mentioned that there's often this idea of, it's going to be fast or like there's one straightforward path. Um, the biggest misconception I've identified from founders is that they'll love the first offer. This ties into Jonathan, what you talked about, you know, people getting multiple offers or going on the market over time. My guess is for everyone who's here on the live session, you've probably gotten an email from someone saying, "We buy agencies, businesses like yours." A lot of them are spam. Not all of them are. Some of them are actually legitimate. But often people will get this offer. even if you don't want to sell, I do recommend taking the call, assuming they're a legitimate acquirer, because you may decide, you know what, you don't want to sell. You're like, you know what, let's roll up my sleeves, keep going for a few more years. Or you may be like, you know what, maybe I don't want to sell to them, but I want to accelerate this selling process and get things together. So, Jonathan, anything you'd add on that before we move ahead?
A couple other misconceptions. One would be that selling is the only way to get to kind of a multiple or amount of money that I'm excited about.
Hmm.
A lot of potential sellers, in my opinion, should be buyers. And that's another way to grow your agency via acquisition. And if done well, you can kind of you start talking about multiplication instead of addition. Um, Another misconception would be that, oh, I know I don't want to sell to this type of buyer, or I know I don't want to sell to private equity. I know I don't want to sell to someone who does the exact same thing as me or that is weak in this area. Until you have those conversations, it's actually really hard to assess what a good fit is going to be for you. So when we take folks to market, one of the things we try to do is actually give them a pretty broad pool of buyers to start so that we can kind of narrow down and learn together what good fit looks like for them because it can be surprising.
Good point. There's more than one path here. Also, which is why it's important to get help from someone who's been there before and has helped people with it rather than it's their first rodeo, as it were. So, shifting into getting ready to exit, Jonathan, question for you, and then you can ask me the question too. What is the main mistake you see in owners who are planning to exit in, let's say, 2 to 4 years?
I'll say I'm going to give you a few. I know that's cheating, but
But
having messy books, keeping your financials clean is pretty important, and that's something that it's hard to do looking backwards. So you need to start it early.
and for you, what would be messy or an example of that?
So running large amounts of personal expenses through the business in ways that aren't categorized well, having a lot of um, dead a dead chart of accounts that you're not using. Your balance sheet might have things that you don't know how they
Mhm.
got there or why. People want to see that you're running a tight ship because your financials are almost your welcome mat in some ways. Um, we see a lot of folks planning for tax avoidance more than planning for exit, and those are two different ways of keeping your books, and they're both valid. But you need to be cognizant of what way if you're listening to your CPA for just to lower your taxes, that's not the only consideration. The other consideration is to make yourself looking good enough to a buyer to maximize a potential exit, even if it means paying a little bit more taxes now.
Because otherwise you find you're arguing about add backs and like what should be adjusted. And, we got a question about adjusted EBITDA, which we may get to later. It's a lot easier if, say, there aren't the personal expenses, then you don't have to argue over that. Also, if you're underpaying yourself now, I've had some clients where the acquirer basically made them increase their salary, which put them at market rate, but that also impacted the valuation because they're like, well, you've been underpaying yourself. Your profits are inflated a bit.
And when we give folks valuations, that's one of the most common recommendations is to pay yourself market rate because the financials you're looking at are rosy because you are artificially inflating profits by subsidizing it with your lack of pay.
But
Um,
there's a joke in estate planning. If this is people are trying to like, don't spend too much money because they want a bigger inheritance for family, friends, and so on. I think the joke is something like fly first class because your heirs will. Yeah.
I don't hear too many jokes from the account planning sector, so thank you for that.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
I have
I get a
Yeah,
good.
same question for you. So what mistakes do you see? Because you see it earlier on than I do usually,
Yeah.
when owners are planning.
Because if someone reaches out and they're like, I want to sell right now, like I'm pointing them to you, right? Like when they are ready to go on the market now, my advice is not going to kick in soon enough. On the other hand, if they're looking 2 to 4 years out or longer, then yes, it can. The two main things, kind of biggest mistake if people are looking to exit in 2 to 4 years, first would be not getting a valuation. I'll ask people, have you gotten, they're like, I want to sell in X years for however much money. A client said, for instance, we want to sell in within 5 years for $8 million, 8 to 10. And so I said, okay, do you have a valuation now? Do you know what your valuation is? And they're like, no. And I said, okay, I'm going to do some really rough numbers. It's probably between 1.5 and $2.5 million. This is not a formal valuation. But the point is, it is a lot lower than the 8 to 10 you want. And so my advice is get a formal valuation, punctuation, you have them. Sometimes people will go to their CPA and get them. Um, I mean, that's okay, but your CPA is likely not a specialist on agencies. So it might give you a general idea, but if the questionnaire is getting into things like, what is the value of your inventory? Agencies don't really have inventory. So like that's a sign they're using a generic template.
I would
Um,
use someone who uh, actually buys and sells agencies,
mhm.
because you're right. It's a unique industry, and the multiples and expectations are always changing. Maybe not in big ways, but even little ways can make that 1.5 a 2.5, or 2.5 a 1.5.
And I mean, like a 1x EBITDA difference. I mean, say you're at 1 million and you get 5x versus 4 million. That's an extra $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing would be not having a standalone number two. What do I mean by standalone number two? They could run the business without you. So, for instance, a lot of my succession planning work is helping clients build up a team member, usually coming from either the accounts side or from business operations, who can run the business for the founder or founders. And ultimately, their title might be COO, perhaps, more likely president or eventually CEO. But the idea is that they can run things without you for quite a while. What not to do would be someone who is, say, great at operations, but they have no interest in the biz dev side of things. I mean, they're going to make your life easier, but you can't just step away. The acquirer is going to have to figure out who's going to do all of the other stuff. So ideally a standalone number two. And if you don't have a standalone number two right now, that's okay, but start building toward that. And I have a lot of articles on that on my site. Um, Speaking of second in command, Jonathan, a question for you. As you were leading people through the end stage of the process, what role does the second in command play in a successful exit?
Yeah. So the buyers often want to see that there's, not all the institutional knowledge and leadership in the agency is going to leave if you leave. So they want a strong bench. They will often, towards the end of negotiations, ask to speak to the second in command if that second in command has not been brought in earlier. And they also often have their own kind of employment agreements negotiated at the same time that you're negotiating your own employment agreement. They want to make sure that there's incentive for them to stick around. Sometimes the burden of that falls on you and not the buyer. It depends on how the deal is structured, but regardless, you want to have someone there, and um, you want to feel good about your relationship with that person too, because uh, you know Going through the sale process isn't for the faint of heart.
No. I have a client who recently exited at a very big number, and they had gone through due diligence twice before for lower valuations, and they proceeded this time. And even doing it like the third time, they compared it to a colonoscopy. So not
I
not
would
fun.
argue it's worse than that because for colonoscopies, you're usually asleep at least.
That's true. That's true. So all right.
So,
On
so
that note,
on the number two note, what does it look like when you're helping a founder become optional in a business?
so I talk a lot about this in my book, Work Less, Earn More, about making yourself more optional in your agency. Here's the quickest proxy for how optional you are as an owner. How long can you step away from the business before things fall apart? In the early days, you probably couldn't step away you couldn't go to lunch without something going wrong. And then it turned into a couple days and then a week, and maybe eventually you could take 2 weeks off. You're probably not going to take a whole year off. Like someone's probably got to sign contracts, he's got to do this and that. But how long can you step away? If it's less than a week, you're not optional. If it's potentially a few months, I mean, it's probably time to either sell your agency or formally make yourself the chair of the business and bring someone in, and officially make them the CEO or something like that. So, how long can you step away before things fall apart? Um, and that is a reminder about building in backups for that now. For instance, a couple years ago, I did a 4 week sabbatical to celebrate 10 years in business. And I did a 3 week around the world trip to Japan and Morocco. And part of that included getting my colleague Diane in as a backup signer on the bank accounts. We went to the bank to do the paperwork. They later told us we could have just docu-signed it, which was like, okay, good to know. And the banker's office was filled with beach memorabilia. She had like seashells and this and that. And she actually made a joke, the banker, about Diane stealing all of the money and going to Aruba while I was away. And I thought that was an odd choice to joke wise to make, but you never know. So how long can you step away? And when I do new engagements with clients, my exit readiness audit, formerly known as the agency growth diagnostic, one of the questions I ask is three. What do you love doing every day? What do you hate doing every day? And what do you tolerate doing every day? Maybe you don't love it, but you're willing to do it. If you have made yourself more optional, you are doing hopefully nothing from the list of things you hate or very little, nothing or almost nothing on the tolerate. And ideally, you're primarily doing things you love doing. There are going to be some things that you can't eliminate completely, but uh, be making yourself optional is how long can you step away and how much are you spending your time on things you like doing versus not. Before we get into the hard truths, Jonathan, anything you'd add on that about optionality?
No, I trust you as the expert in that field. I do think that sabbaticals are a great way to test that without burning the agency to the ground.
I definitely don't recommend burning the agency to the ground, although I do have advisory and coaching calls with clients, and they sometimes are thinking about that. I usually am advising them not to. I did share a link in chat on extended leave preparation. That's if you want to take time off, that could be either for a sabbatical, could be related to family leave, it could be related to something else. The One of the key things with that is doing what I would call a stress test. So instead of taking a month off or several months off, start by taking a week off with zero contact. I mean, let your team know, don't just disappear, but have them track what comes up where they would have needed you, where there was no alternative. And then do it for a week, debrief, and then do it for 2 weeks, right? And then do it for longer. Um, this is a good time. We just got a question, David. Thank you from the audience. When and how do you approach your number two about taking on a bigger role? And when would you start sharing financial information on that? I can start with that, and then Jonathan would love your perspective. When do you approach? Do not wait until right before you have someone that wants to buy the agency right now, because as Jonathan said, they're going to want to talk to that person. I had a client where the acquirer was doing a front-loaded process and they wanted to talk before doing an LOI. That was pretty aggressively early, but I mean, it happens.
Does happen. Yeah.
The problem was that I had advised the owners to do an updated compensation agreement with that key team member like a year earlier, about like what would happen compensation wise if the deal closed, like incentives. Unfortunately, now that the acquirer was right there at the door and they wanted to talk to the person and they hadn't negotiated it, the employee ended up getting a higher percentage incentive-wise than they would have gotten if it had been all hypothetical a year earlier. So I would tell them sooner than later. This is if it's exit-wise. If it's about taking on a bigger role, maybe it's toward moving up. That client I mentioned where it was a 5-year succession plan, when the team member was an account manager, the owner did not tell them you're going to be the CEO someday, right? It was more like we see you having potential. We'd like you to lead the client services department and maybe go more from there. Like, so don't tell them everything you have in mind because it may not work out. Like if they're incompetent as a director or as a VP, you definitely don't want to promote them to CEO. Or like they might be a great VP, but don't make them assume they're entitled to get promoted regardless. Um, but do tell them sooner than later. Like they can't read your mind. If you have big career plans for them and they think there's no path, you may find they're leaving to take another job. And you're thinking, wait, but I was going to promote you. Yeah, well, thinking of promotion isn't the same to their bank account as actually getting promoted, actually getting the raise, actually getting the title. Jonathan, what would you add about when to tell the number two, or the follow-up question, when to share financial information with the number two?
Yeah, I think this question feels daunting because it feels like, okay, I have to have this really formal discussion. But in my experience, these are oftentimes best as cocktail conversations where you're feeling them out. It's one or two sentences. You see how they react,
Hmm.
maybe over a couple drinks. And, it's like, hey, you've been doing great here. Like, what do you see your role being in the future? Like, don't
Like you're
promise
not promising
anything.
anything, but
Yeah.
you're hearing what they're interested in.
Yeah. And see if they have the drive, right? Um, you can get a sense of that. You want to get a sense of that early before you invest too much time yourself. Um, I think, was there another question?
I think we've covered it.
Okay.
That does remind me, whenever, and I've shared a link in chat if people are joining live, if something isn't getting done, it's because you're missing one, two, or three things. And you can think of it as a Venn diagram with the three circles: desire, competence, and capacity. If someone doesn't have the desire to do it, like to say get promoted and take on your job, uh, they're not going to do it well. If
Can
they don't
I?
have the competence, oh, go ahead. Oh,
No, I
uh,
interrupted.
so they need the desire to do it, otherwise they're going to be half-hearted. They need the competence to do it, because otherwise they'll do it poorly. And they need the capacity in terms of just the time to get it done, or else it'll just be kind of slipshod. Like, don't do what a client did several years ago, where the owner had already promoted the key team member. Like, hadn't gotten my help on succession planning. It was more like, they are now the CEO. Can you advise and coach them? It's like, sure. The problem was they had not removed their old responsibilities as the head of client services, head of accounts.
Mm,
So they were trying to be the CEO of the agency and run the account team. That was not going well. I helped them make the most of it, but that's definitely not the order of operations I would have recommended.
yeah. In terms of when to share financial information, I think a good gut check is when that person has the ability to change the finances. So, and you don't
Mhm.
have to, it doesn't have to be the whole P&L to start. It could be just their department's P&L or just their a certain client's P&L. But um, you want to start making sure that they can think in that way about, growing revenue and keeping expenses in check. And then at a certain point, they're ready for the full financial picture when you are comfortable with them knowing your salary.
Right. Knowing your salary and also maybe what perks you're giving yourself. Like, as the director of operations at an agency, I knew that we were leasing a BMW for one of the owners, which, like, adjusted to today's dollars, we were spending maybe like $2,000 a month to lease the BMW. And as far as I can tell, the only time they were using that for business purposes was when they would roll up every 2 weeks outside the office, didn't actually come in the office, and he would roll down the window and he would hand me the paychecks, which I would distribute to the team. Um, I don't know if the IRS had audited that. I don't know how smoothly that would have gone, but yeah, it needs to be someone you trust. Before we get into the hard truths, Jonathan, I did have one other question, which is, uh, what numbers matter most to buyers, and how do you prep those?
um, that can vary, unfortunately. I think the absolute dollar of profit would be the most important.
Okay.
But they're also paying attention to things like profit margin, trends in profitability and top line revenue, um, and particular client concentration levels. So the if you have one whale client and a bunch of minnows, they're going to see you as a much riskier investment for the most part.
That makes sense. I mean, client concentration is really dangerous in general. I mean, client dilution is bad as well if you've got, hundreds of clients and they're taking up way too much of your time. But client concentration, like when I'm doing an exit readiness audit and I'm sharing perspective on what the acquirer is going to think, if they see client concentration, and they absolutely will, whether it's sooner or later, they are going to use that to discount your valuation. I
Even
mean,
if
as they should. It's a major risk.
Yes, yeah, even if they don't care that much, they'll use it against you to get a lower price.
And remember, for everyone listening, no one buying your agency needs to buy your specific agency more than you need to sell it.
Hmm.
So make it as attractive as possible. All right, let's on the happy note, let's move on to some more hard truths and cautionary tales. So, Jonathan, you have seen deals fall apart at the last minute. What causes that? And I'm guessing it's more than one thing.
Yeah, I mean, broadly, there's external factors that you can't really control, then internal factors that you either can control or can identify. Externally, it could be, economic downturn. It could be financing falls through if they're counting on a bank loan or an SBA loan. It could be geopolitical. We've seen this actually recently with um, trade wars and tariffs having an impact on, well, I don't think I want to invest in a UK firm right now. Internally, the negotiation process often gives you a lot more information about what you're getting into culturally with an agency, and you might uncover something that gives you pause. You might uncover multiple things that give you pause, and at a certain point, you want to pull out of the deal, just because you know that your life will be miserable afterwards. Um, we've also had folks pull out because their business started doing really well, and they're like, "Wow, we need to ride this growth uh, spurt before we start thinking about selling, because right now we're being valued on lower numbers than what we think we'll see in the future."
That makes sense. So I mean, it's the deal isn't done until things are signed and you've received the wire transfer or other payment. But of course, I mean, we haven't even gotten into earnouts. Just because you have a valuation of a certain number does not mean you're going to get all of that up front. You likely won't, or if you do, it's under pretty onerous terms.
You likely will not. Yeah, yeah. If you do, it's going to be discounted for various reasons.
Yeah.
Um, what's a common succession myth that holds founders back?
It would be that no one can do your job as well as you can. To me, that's the wrong way to look at it, that no one could do the job as well as you. In some cases, you need someone who can do your job better than you can. You know, I've worked with clients over the years where they're running their agency and they just don't like managing people. But if you are the owner operator of an independent agency, you are a manager. Even if I had a client say that, their ideal outcome from working together was that eventually they would spend 0% of their time managing people. And I'm like, sorry, but that's not going to work. Even if you hire, say, a COO to run delivery and everything else, you're going to manage them, and you're also going to handle escalations from them. They handle a lot, but whatever escalates, you're going to deal with. You're probably still managing people focused on growth, and you'll also probably have an assistant. So, or maybe a shared assistant between you and your number two. So management doesn't go away completely. If you truly hate managing people, you should probably reposition yourself as like a fractional CMO or something along those lines. Um,
I think to that point too, you mentioned, um, some people might be able to do your job better than you. I think it's also important to note that some people might do your job worse than you, but
mhm.
or less efficiently than you, and
Yeah,
that's okay because your time is better spent on higher level things,
for
right?
sure.
Like maybe you are the best copywriter in the world, but
Mm.
now you're an agency owner. So
Yeah.
you need to be spending your time on strategic things and growth. And you can hire someone to do that role. Maybe they're a little slower, but
Mhm.
they're doing it for cheaper
Yeah.
and they're allowing you to do more.
Ideally, you're doing what I would call $1,000 an hour activities. You may not be billing $1,000 an hour, but it's high impact, high value time, rather than, things that someone else could do. And you know what? Sometimes maybe the person could be less good at it than you are, but more consistent.
Mm-hmm. That
That, yeah,
that's very true. Usually with agency owners, consistency tends to not be a strength.
yeah. Before we get into some audience questions, and I know we've got some coming in live, and I know we have some more pre-questions. Here's a question for both of us. Jonathan, I'll ask you first. What is the most painful wish I had known post-deal moment from founders? Like what they wish they had known before the deal?
I just had a conversation with someone who we helped sell his business, and he started the call with, "You didn't tell me it was going to be this sucky," and I I did. I actually had told him that, but the
Oh,
challenge was that he had gotten so emotionally invested in selling his company throughout the process that he gave up any of his leverage towards the end of the deal, and he was going to do the deal regardless. And there were clear signs that this was not going to be a fun earnout um, from the beginning. And, we had those conversations, but it was clear that he was already living kind of an alternate reality. So I think this might not be post deal, but pre deal, keeping your emotions and expectations in check is very important because the moment that you um, give up the company intellectually, you lose all of your leverage moving forward.
yeah. I sometimes hear from people who are in kind of sad situations where they had mentally moved on and they just let the business kind of wither and they
Mm.
didn't have a lot to sell anymore. I mean, in fact, some of these were ones where companies approached me about me buying their company, and they just stopped trying. So there either wasn't much to buy, or I would have had to invest a lot of money to turn things around. And it's like they needed to sell that more than I needed to buy their crumbling business.
Yeah. How would you answer that question?
I would say the problem, the what they wish they had known, was they focused too much on the valuation. What's
Hmm.
the number the agency is worth, and not enough about the fact that they temporarily have a boss. In particular, a boss they don't like. This is where it goes poorly because the person is acquiring and you're going to stick around, probably some sort of earnout and or other commitment that you're going to be working there. Uh, they're now your boss.
Hmm.
Like, don't just vet them as a buyer and do they have the money? Do they have the financing? How are they as a manager? Because you're reporting to them now. I had a client years ago in Canada who had outside investors, and at one point she was complaining that, the investors only care about money. And I'm like, yeah, that's what investors do. They only care about the money. But here's the thing. If you are making them lots of money, they're going to be happy. And you're not going to hear from them very often. If you are not making them a lot of money, you're going to hear from them a lot more often than you'd like. So, how are they as a boss? Think about that. Also meet with your own lawyer, not the corporate lawyer, about the employment agreement because you need to get personal legal advice about that employment agreement. Because, what if they fire you? What if you quit? Like what's the story on all of that?
Hmm.
Um,
We did a valuation recently for a firm that certainly had a sellable business, although it was declining in revenues, um, and a strong balance sheet. But we did the math on, all right, well, what if you shut it down versus sell it? And it ended up being like a, three to $400,000 delta between those two. Once you factored in working capital requirements and some of that. But
okay.
then the question is that worth 2 to 3 years of your life, right? To get that extra 2 to 300,000, and in many cases, it's not. So, just being realistic with yourself too, and keeping your options open. It's not. Um, the prize isn't selling your agency. The prize is your quality of life, and selling your agency can be an input into that, but it shouldn't be the ultimate goal.
That's a great point. I created a calculator for my clients, and it's now in my agency profitability toolkit. It's a calculator. How much can you make from just your pay alone without selling your agency? And the key to that is pay yourself enough and ideally give yourself significant raises that can compound over time. So, like, I don't know, let's say you want to sell for $10 million. If you're paying yourself 300,000 a year and you can give yourself a 10% raise every year, over 10 years, that is almost $5 million. Now, this isn't accounting for taxes or inflation or things like that. But the point there is if you're paying yourself enough and giving yourself raises, you've made half the money you wanted and you're still keeping the full profit flow.
Yeah.
Or, if you can somehow manage to give yourself a 25% raise every year, that would be very high. Like you're probably not going to. But if you do, and you're at 300,000, you'll have paid yourself $10 million dollars just from your salary.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that a little differently. I think at some point, stop paying yourself salary and start taking distributions, right? But if you're talking about the combined
I,
entity,
I'm thinking the combined for this, yeah, sort of
yeah,
hypothetical floating example.
yeah,
But it goes back to your it's not an either or kind of thing.
right.
We have a closing question, but before we get to that, I think we have time for we've been answering some audience questions so far. Uh, Claire, what's a question we can answer from audience members?
Sure. So we have an audience question that came in for an agency owner preparing for an exit or actively exploring exiting next year in 2026.
Mhm.
Um, is there anything they should think differently about in their annual planning from a typical year? They listed, for example, holding off on additional full-time headcount, increasing revenue targets for greater growth, greater or less overhead, in terms to investments with AI and automation, cost investment versus differentiation, business optimization, any general guidance there. And there was an additional question as far as the main mistakes you might see owners making who are planning to exit in the next 2 to 4 years. So somewhat separate.
Got it. Maybe Jonathan, if you want to start with if someone wants to sell in the next 12 months,
Hmm.
what should they do to think about annual planning differently?
Yeah, so I would say in general, run your agency as if you aren't going to sell it. And that is going to be the same way that a buyer would approach those same decisions. So if you need to invest in headcount because, you have more work or it's whatever reason, do it. Obviously, don't be frivolous about it, but know that a good buyer, a good fit buyer for you is going to make the same decisions that you make. And the only thing that I'd say don't invest in is things that will require multi-year paybacks. So if you are thinking about, you know, 3 years down the line, we could be fully integrated with AI. Well, how much are you going to have to spend now for that to happen? And it might not. So don't make any big bets right now.
There's sort of the idea of friends planning to sell a house they've been in for 20 years, and the house is outdated. It's like the kitchen design and so on. But they're not going to replace the countertops or the cabinets because the new people are going to want something different. Like don't spend that, but also recognize that you're going to have to give a discount for the fact that it's a 20-year-old kitchen, in that example. The thing that I would add, and then Claire, let us know on the next question. If you are doing hourly pricing, you have got to stop doing that. In the age of AI, you are hurting yourself, you're hurting your profits. Um, you're not capturing the benefits of AI efficiency and so on. I shared a link in chat about hourly pricing transition. You don't have to change your whole model overnight. I mean, eventually you want to change your whole model, but there is a phased approach you can do. Start with paid discovery, flat fee for a specific scope. Then, as you're getting things down, start with newer clients. It is going to be complicated. I was speaking with a client earlier this week, and she was like, "It's going to be really hard." I'm like, yeah, but you want to sell your agency. If you're not selling it right now, it's going to become more and more of a liability.
Mhm.
Which, speaking of that, I know, Jonathan, in the past, you've mentioned AI hasn't directly impacted valuations. To what extent is that still true, and or does it show up in other ways in your work?
I think there's a couple clear areas where it's certainly starting to impact valuations for firms that are heavy in web development um, or content development, and sometimes SEO is kind of related there. There's there aren't as many comps, like there aren't as many agencies being bought because people are worried about AI and want to see how things are going to play out. So that's depressing valuations in those particular segments, but overall in everything else, um, we haven't seen much of an effect yet. I think, you know, there's there's going to be demand for marketing services. The question is, how does it change? And it's still a little bit of an unknown, but people's growth strategies, that involve acquisition, that has not changed. That's still there, and so valuations are still um, holding steady.
Got it. It does seem like eventually something's going to shift. Is there more comps? Um, but I mean, regardless, clients are seeing, in my experience, clients are seeing AI usage as a proxy for your overall competence at the agency. So, like, if you're doing nothing,
Hmm.
that doesn't make it look like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, So before we have a final closing question, but I see we had an audience question. Claire, thank you. How far in advance of an exit do you recommend engaging with your firm? This is a real question. Someone actually asked this. We didn't just make it up. Jonathan, how would you answer that?
Um, uh, you know, like the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. It's kind of that. Like the sooner the better, because knowledge is power, right? This is one of your largest assets, if not your largest asset. And so knowing, being a good steward of that asset and helping to narrow your choices and refine your thinking and inform your business planning, I think is really important. And it's frankly not that large of an investment to start that relationship early. For us, it's, a $5,000 one-time thing, and then we'll have annual updates with you for half of that price.
Which is a great value. I mean, also, I've been sending people to what's now Punctuation for, I don't know, like 12, 13 years, something like that. And you're still charging the same amount for the valuation, and people get even more for the price. So it's a really good value, no pun intended.
That's actually true. I should rethink
I,
that.
I mean, if you were my client, I would advise you to raise your prices, but uh,
We like the valuation at a good entry level price because it's a great way to start a relationship, and we don't want M&A to be something that feels too big to tackle, too big to understand. It's something
yeah.
that, you know, you can get involved with sooner rather than later in small ways, and those small ways can actually mean very big differences down the road.
Makes sense. To answer that question myself, how soon to engage me? If you were looking to sell within the next few months, like go talk to Jonathan. If you are thinking further out, I mean, please reach out to me sooner rather than later. Uh, because the more time you have before your exit, the more we can get you a better valuation, better terms, and things like that. Or as my new tagline goes, build an agency you like for an exit you will love. Final question for you, Jonathan. And I guess I've got my own version of that. Uh, what?
Let me
Oh,
ask yours
yeah,
first.
yeah.
So what's one thing a founder can do this year to set themselves up for success? And by this year, I think I mean in the next 12 months.
Sure. Yeah. I would start by identifying what is your ideal exit. This is the ideal exit event. The ideal exit for everyone listening, it's going to be different. Maybe it's sell for $10 million in 5 years. Maybe it's sell for $5 million in 2 years. Maybe it's something else. I have a client whose goal is to sell for $120 million. There are ways away from that, but they've got that goal. And so when I'm advising, I can help them get toward that. So I shared a link to my agency exit plan template. It's about a dozen questions. Even just the first three questions are going to make a big impact. Get clear on what your exit is. And once you know what that is, you can compare it to where you are now, kind of point A, point B. The further you are from your ideal exit, like let's talk. But that's a free tool. You can get that at the Sakas Company website, and we'll put that in the video description as well. Flipping that, Jonathan, what about this quarter? What is one thing a founder can do this quarter to make their agency more sellable?
Okay, I'm going to give you two things.
All right, go ahead, go ahead.
The first is to audit your chart of accounts and just take a real hard look at how you're organizing your financials and make sure that it makes sense and that it's uh, presents well. The second thing is to document and implement a business development process that is not entirely reliant on the founder. That doesn't mean the founder can't be involved. The founder is often still involved, but there needs to be a process in place that you can point potential buyers to say, look, if I step away, that doesn't mean that new business goes away.
That makes sense. Make yourself more optional. And you know what? That's going to help the agency regardless of what happens. Well, on that note, Jonathan, thank you so much for participating in the fireside chat today. And for everyone who's joining live, you'll get the recording via email within 24 hours. If you're already watching the recording, you got it. Awesome. And if you join live, you'll get my newsletter, which more than one agency owner has called the only email they read every time. So thank you so much for everyone who's joined, and good luck out there. See you next time.